Welcome to Goldfinch Bio's interview series, The Feeder. We're speaking with people impacted by kidney disease and a wide range of experts who are driving change, innovation, and hope in the kidney space. In this episode, Dr. Tony Johnson, President and CEO of Goldfinch Bio, speaks with Joshua Tarnoff, Chief Executive Officer of NephCure Kidney International.
Boy, so Josh, welcome to The Feeder. We're really grateful to have you with us today. I'm excited to introduce our listeners to you and the important work of NephCure. I think to kick things off, it would be great to have you introduce yourself, say a little bit about yourself, and then about NephCure and the focus of NephCure so that our listeners can learn more about you.
Wonderful. Tony, thank you, first of all, to you and also the folks at Goldfinch for inviting us. This is a very important topic, and we are honored to be partaking, so thank you. My background, really quick, I was on your side of the fence for 34 years in the biopharmaceutical industry, and through working with a kidney company, got to see this amazing organization called NephCure, and jokingly said, well, one day, guys, if you have an opening, and wow, dreams come true. So NephCure is really an incredible organization. So it's a patient advocacy organization dedicated to nephrotic syndrome, but it's a little bit of an odd duck in that we're a research-focused patient advocacy organization. And very quickly, we were founded about 20 years ago. We just had our 20th anniversary. And if you can imagine being a patient 20 years ago at year 2000-ish, if you got a diagnosis of nephrotic syndrome, we didn't even know what the disease was, how it worked. And so the organization through the years has dedicated about $40 million worth of research that went into basic and translational research. And now with all the explosion of clinical trials, we've pivoted now as an organization to really be more clinically focused and make sure that all companies can recruit and that we welcome in the next generation of first therapies ever. So thank you.
Wonderful. And of course, I'm completely aligned with you. I think NephCure is a phenomenal organization and why we are so keen to partner with you. But now I'd like to explore the current landscape of research in kidney disease and the current state of innovation in kidney research with you. So, to start off with, can you help our listeners understand how have rare glomerular diseases been treated over the last 50 to 60 years and what's been the standard of care?
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture, as you know. And for folks not familiar with it, nephrotic syndrome and FSGS in particular, there haven't been any new advances. And first of all, there are no approved therapies, right? And there haven't been any advances in 50 years with steroids. And it's really sadly been an acceptable fait accompli that if you have this disease, if you don't respond to steroids and some other things, you're probably looking at dialysis and transplant. The tragedy is that we're using off-label therapies. And I'm not talking steroids at 5 milligrams like you and I get a bee sting. This is 50, 80 milligrams, even in children. It's incredibly immunosuppressive. And then we have other off-label immunosuppressive agents. And so often the off-label treatments are almost as bad as the disease. And sadly, that's where we've been for a long time.
Yeah. And just to follow up on steroids, I know you appreciate this, but those high doses long-term are associated with a myriad of long-term negative consequences. And then for immunosuppressives, some actually worsen kidney function, as well as having tolerability issues. So it really isn't pretty. You mentioned transplant. From my point of view, transplant's a treatment, not a cure. But what do you think?
Yeah, it's a great perspective. First off, I'm glad we have transplants. I'm glad we have dialysis. Don't get me wrong, because without those, people would be dying. But they should not be an acceptable fait accompli. Our job at NephCure is to help you keep whatever kidney you've got, whether it's your native kidney or your transplant kidney. We want you to keep that. And so, yeah, it's a great question about transplant. In some patients, in rare cases, though, it is almost a treatment, and that a lot of the times it doesn't come back. But sadly, in about 40–50% of the cases, the FSGS, for example, comes back almost immediately. And so transplants, it's not a free ride. It's a tough haul.
What can you say about the state of clinical research, the state of clinical trials in say, starting off with the last 50 years or so, and then moving forward to now?
Yeah, it's funny. If you're a nephrologist and you go to the ASN meeting, everybody has seen this slide that says out of the 15 or 16 or so medical subspecialties, nephrology ranked last in clinical trial participation, right? How many times have you seen that? And the reality is that now with the acceptance back for people in history, first we had to figure out, okay, how does this disease tick? What's the pathophysiology? What's the pathway? And once we figured those out, then pharma companies can say, wow, I think I've got something for that. But it's not really cost effective for me to go into a rare disease. So, why should I do that? And so fortunately, we had a change in guidance, as you know, with the FDA, and that led to the acceptance of proteinuria as a surrogate biomarker for outcome. And now we've had a tremendous awakening of clinical trials. And so we went from 3 trials in 2016 to now over 25 today in 2021. And so the landscape is beautiful in that if I talk to a patient, I go, look, we now know there's many pathways in this disease, right? It's not a simple disease. It's very heterogeneous. But the good news is, matching that, there are a number of companies, such as Goldfinch and others, that are exploring those pathways specifically, so we can target that drug to that. So the promise, and not just hopeful thinking, 10 years ago, we're not far away. And so the clinical trial landscape has exploded, and nephrology is now getting on board. And I think the infrastructure exists today where it maybe didn't 3 years ago.
Fabulous. And what do you think about the regulatory environment and I guess the state of science, academic science in the kidney arena?
Oh, wow, great points, both of them. First, regulatory wise, I can't say enough good about the cardio and renal division at FDA. They're real pioneers, and you've got folks down there who really want to see new therapies come to market for these patients. They realize the burden. They've sat on our panels and we've had them talk to patients. They know firsthand the urgent need that's out there, and they've really been wonderful and helpful. They'll never sacrifice, obviously, on safety, but they really have been super helpful to companies, giving guidance and really being there for them. The other part of your question is
around the science.
The science is, so it's great. We've now invested in research, observational studies, and people who really look at precisely what are these pathways. We often say, if you've seen one FSGS patient, well, you've seen one patient. They're so different. Even twins in a family can be different, right?
Yeah.
And so we are now aware that there are multiple pathways. I think Neptune has probably identified 5 major pathways that we can now perform assays on. We now also have genetic testing that can add tremendous, a lens onto exactly what type of you have. And so if we have that and we match it to the different pathways that are being studied, we have the ability in the near future to match. And I think that's what separates, and people need to realize that nephrotic syndrome is very diverse. It's not easy, but the great news is, man, there's a great number of technologies on the horizon. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it is wonderful. And NephCure hasn't been silent through all this. Help our listeners understand the role that NephCure is playing to advance this. I would call it a paradigm shift towards a lot more research, clinical research, a lot more science, and a supportive regulatory environment.
That's great. So NephCure, as I mentioned before, was really founded to find a cure. It's been a very purposeful mission Step one, basic research, translational research, and now into the clinic. And so it would be a horrible shame, right? If all of a sudden all this research advanced to this point and wow, you can't recruit trials. Rare disease is notoriously difficult to recruit, no matter what therapeutic category, but kidney disease in particular. Again, as we talked about, there wasn't a lot of experience here with it. So what's NephCure's role? We don't conduct the trials. We don't recruit the patients. We are, as we've been called, a backbone, right? We provide the framework of the key stakeholders that are very cross-functional and come together. So we see it as our role to bring you at Goldfinch together with patients, researchers, FDA, all of the folks who are stakeholders in this mission. And the good news is we've got wonderful relationships, as you know, great organizations like the ASN with the Key Project, National Kidney Foundation and others, that we really do come together, and Neptune Research Consortia. So these are people who've been working in the space and to share. So NephCure's role, about 3 years ago, we launched a program called Gateway. And the remit of Gateway is to remove, in a short time, the obstacles and the hurdles to patient recruitment. And the goal was no clinical trial fails due to patient recruitment. And that's kind of been our remit and focus for the past several years.
And how do you think it's going? What's NephCure's impact in the past 3 years through Gateway on supporting clinical trials?
Thank you. It's a perfect lead in. About, I think 3 days ago, it was published. If people haven't seen it, if they go to KI, Kidney International, it's the largest kidney journal of its kind. And there was a wonderful article outlining NephCure's role in exactly this subject. And then there's also another sub-editorial that I would also highly advise people to read about pediatric inclusion in clinical trials, where if you can, about 40% of the patients are pediatric. So at some point, we all start with adults, but then migrate to children. And remember that this affects them both almost equally. So NephCure's role, I think, it was a shaky start, as you know, right? Anytime being a pioneer is difficult. But again, I don't think it's just NephCure. It's NephCure, FDA, it's companies like Goldfinch all coming around the table saying, how do we fix this? And I think today, 3 years on from Gateway, we're in a much better place. We know how to recruit more effectively. We know how to write the protocols that are patient-friendly. We know trying to match the right patient to the right trial is a lot better than it used to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So what do you think? What does innovation look like in the next 5 to 10 years in the kidney space?
Oh, that's a great future to look at. We're one of the few rare disease categories that can say the future is looking incredibly bright. So ideally, looking at the heterogeneity of the disease, right? We want to be able to give everybody something. And the reality is that not one drug is going to be the panacea for all nephrotic syndrome. It's going to be more along the lines of cancer therapies, where this is your type, we're going to try this. If this doesn't work, we may add or replace that with something else. And so the technology looks to be a combination of things, and having drugs that are tailored to a particular pathway and that can be used in combination. And the good news is that there's a lot of these on the horizon. And, as one of the, journals said, kidney's the new liver. NASH was the focus right back in the 2010 era. Now kidney is front and center. And so we're finally seeing some great stuff. So I would say, honestly, the technology, at a broad sense, is looking beautiful. And we could spend days talking about the specific pathways, because not only do we know those pathways, we've got targeted therapies for them.
Yeah, well, great comments. So, you mentioned oncology. It seems to me precision medicine was born in oncology, and it's quite mature there. They're evolving and moving away from defining cancer by the organ and now redefining it by the pathway. And that helps also point researchers to pathway inhibitors that provide specific treatments. Do you see something similar happening in the kidney?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, the reality is that the kidney is an innocent bystander in a disease. And nephrotic syndrome is not a starting in the kidney. It's something that in the body humor overall, of course, has some insult going on with a pathway. And it's this poor kidney that happens to be in the way. And so if we deal with the pathway, and as you know, many pathways involve other organ systems, but we've also found pathways that are unique to the kidney. And so applying therapies that are broadly applicable to throughout the body that we're currently doing, right? We're borrowing off-label therapies that were never meant for the kidney. The poor kidney is a fragile organ.
Yeah.
And to use things from cancer that we're doing now would have broad toxicities. There's no free ride here. So the hope is that by being able to say, okay, you've got this type, and now we can match that to this, we can avoid other toxicities in the liver and the lungs and just the immune system in general.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just taking that nephrotic syndrome focus, given where NephCure is focused, do you see that happening amongst the various types of nephrotic syndrome? You mentioned that every 2 nephrotic syndrome patients look very different. Do you see multiple pathways emerging for the nephrotic syndrome patient population?
Oh yeah, it's so, for people to understand who are not familiar with it, you first have CKD, right? So that's 1 in 10 Americans, depending on what data source you use. Some people 1 in 7, so that's 30+ million Americans. Then you go to the more aggressive forms, which unfortunately are the rarer types that we're involved with, right? And that's the protein spilling nephrotic syndrome. And syndrome by definition is a collection of related but separate diseases. And then you go and you look at something, you have membranous nephropathy and minimal change disorder and IgA, some people, and then other people, FSGS. But the problem is FSGS, we label it a disease, but the truth is it's probably more like a syndrome in itself. It may be a subcategory, right? So we can't treat all FSGS patients the same way. And I think that really absolutely lends to the discussion that we're having is people have to appreciate that it is a very polyfactorial and very heterogeneous disease. And we have to recognize that as we apply treatments.
All right. So with innovation decidedly picking up in kidney disease, it would be great to get your thoughts on how the community is embracing this change. So, what's been the patient's response, the patient community's response to the innovation and clinical research that's ramping up over the past 5 years or so?
That's great. I mean, so if you go pre 5 years, the wins were small, and patients really frustrated. We say, hey, this is great, but it's years away. And now within the past 5 years, the frame time you outlined, it's dramatically different. And so we've had to launch new initiatives to reflect that. And so number one, we've now recognized that speed to care is a huge factor, right? Often patients go years before they get to a glomerular disease expert. There's only about 300 of them out of the 12,000 nephrologists. So that's been a priority of ours. So we've created the Nephrotic Syndrome Specialist Program to shorten that time. And those are also the folks that, as you know, they tend to be more research oriented and involved with clinical trials, which leads to the next priority, which is connecting patients to clinical trials. Because today you've been asking for alternatives to high dose steroids. We've been asking, our patients have been begging for alternatives to some of these toxic off-label therapies. So now, while we can't call these treatments, of course, they are care alternatives participating in a clinical trial. So that's been a focus of ours. And then I guess the third key point I would point out that we've pivoted is forming at a grassroots level. We've relaunched our regional communities throughout the United States. We've got 6 regions, 1 in Canada and 5 in the US, and they're composed of a series of 25 local communities. And their charge this year is really to go out, shake the trees of the general nephrologists and say, hey, there's a lot of options today. As we talked, you got genetic screening that can be run, and we can do all kinds of find out what your disease is. There are clinical trials underfoot. There are all kinds of new things that we can offer that we couldn't before. So it's changed, and I would share with your folks that, boy, there's such an incredible groundswell of enthusiasm and optimism now that didn't exist 5 years ago. It's a completely different conversation we have with patients than we had 5 years ago.
Fantastic. And so you're connecting through the gateway, or I mean, how are patients connecting with each other and with NephCure?
So first off, we've two-pronged approach. So we have NephCure headquarters. That's, we're less than 20 people, but we fight above our weight. We do a lot, as you know, right?
Absolutely.
So we have outreach through internet connections. If you Google, FSGS, you're kind of sent to our gateway system, which is a patient match tool. The patient goes on, logs in some information, gives you a preliminary filter of trials you might qualify for, and then it asks more questions, and we get more and more refined. So that's the one way. The other way, though, is realizing that in rare disease, it's all about grassroots. Pharma companies, I come from there, you come from there. It's not the model we grew up with, right? With big chronic diseases where contract research organizations, you mill patients. It's just the opposite. It's really intimacy and site, getting to know your site and patient responsiveness. And so we're trying at a grassroots level to roll out to all the big nephrology practices and get them to say, hey, it's a new day. These glomerular disease specialists, they're not here to steal your patients. They're here to work with you to get the best care. And so we call it the care triad, right? You've got the patient, you got the general nephrologist, and the glomerular disease specialist. And if they all work together, great things will happen. And they get connected to the trials and magic. So that's 2021 for us.
Wow, fantastic. Let's see it happen. So, just talking about clinical trials, it has been hard, I understand, for some clinical trials to be fully enrolled. It's been hard, particularly for rare diseases like FSGS, to find those suitable patients for clinical trials, get them enrolled, and generate data that will help the whole community. What do you think about the environment as it is today and where it's evolving to, and how can NephCure help?
Great, thank you. It's one where, as we talked about 3 years ago, there was no infrastructure, and pioneers like GSK who tried FSGS trials, they failed to recruit, and that was a big problem. And then you had others, and they've come along and figured it out. We've all stumbled together, and I think the environment today is dramatically different. I think that contract research organizations and others have figured out that it is about intimacy, and they have to change their models. I think we've also learned that protocols and different things that are involved, that patients need to be brought into the picture, right? A lot of people design protocols with guess what? No patient's going to do that, or that patient just doesn't exist. Everybody wants that perfect patient, right? And that's no such animal. And so the reality is that where we are today, we've dramatically better at recruiting for trials than we were. But I think you and I would both agree we're still a long way from where we need to be. But at least, I think with good, honesty, I can face somebody and say, wow, there's a heck of a lot of infrastructure that didn't exist before. And now we've got organizations like Neptune and others with patients. We've learned how to find the patients, and NephCures, that's been our charge, which is, how do you find these patients before it's too late and they don't qualify? And that all means getting to earlier in the paradigm, as we talked about. It's not just the care of finding the patients earlier, because that year time between that general nephrologist they saw and now finally getting to the expert, well, that patient can be now disqualified because their function is so low. So we've really focused now, I think, moving toward the group practices and making sure that, hey guys, we're all here to work together. And that, I think this year we'll see a significant change in enrollment.
Fabulous. Do patients with FSGS or nephrotic syndrome connect via social media?
That's probably the number one way. It was astounding to me, right? I mean, anybody over the age of 40, right? The internet, I was blown away and at how much Facebook and all of these accounts, patients with rare disease seek out other patients. It's a very lonely place to be. Any football stadium in the US, you'd only find about one nephrotic syndrome patient in the whole thing. And so there's a very active social media network in the United States, especially, and also around the world. I would say there's maybe 4 to 5 chat groups, and they talk all the time. And so once they learn that a trial is available and different things are available to them, it gets out pretty well. And so we try to foster that. We mentor and oversee a lot of these and are active. So social media is key. Yeah.
Got it. What do you think the barriers are to engaging those community nephrologists, general nephrologists in clinical research and engaging patients to participate through those trials?
I've been making a lot of comments about general nephrologists. I just want to be clear with folks. It's the average nephrologist sees a new case of, let's say, FSGS maybe once a year or once every 2 years. I mean, that's just the statistics and the number. And they spend most of their day with dialysis patients and whatnot. So they're very smart people. They're angels in the world trying to help. But the reality is, how do you become an expert in something if you don't see it very often, right?
Mm.
And how do you become aware? How, even if this is your specialty and you focus on clinical trials, how do you keep 20-some clinical trials all front of mind? And so I think the issue with general nephrologists is, number one, the world has changed and you may not realize it. We go to ASN meetings, right? You and I go there and you see today so much glomerular disease focus that wasn't there even just a few years ago.
Yeah.
And ASN's done a wonderful job of making clinical trials part of their focus. But the reality is the general nephrologists still hold the vast majority of nephrotic syndrome patients. And they're not aware, just because they don't have the time and bandwidth to be aware of all these opportunities. And so what we're trying to do is get to them and say, look, there's no embarrassment of you sharing with your patient with a glomerular disease expert. And also, be honest with you, it's probably a financially losing proposition when you treat FSGS patients by yourself. It takes a lot of time. You're on the internet researching what's latest and greatest. So what we're trying to do is broker the conversation between the general nephrologist and the glomerular disease expert, who is probably conducting clinical trials, to say, I'm not going to steal your patient. and there's no shame in talking to each other. And we're trying to broker that. And ASN is really front and center with us in lockstep, and that's happening. And I think we're going to see
Good. Fabulous. How are you? Give us some idea of how you're brokering that.
Sure. So this year we'll be rolling out at a local level glomerular disease. We call them local glomerular disease updates, where someone from NephCure, one of our local leaders, contacts the glomerular disease expert in that community and says, look, I want to form a more supportive, integrated local community here. Who are the people who are your, people you work with on a routine basis? Who are the big groups? And let's have a conference. And what we want to do is, maybe the first topic is all these updates that we've been talking about this afternoon, right? And the second is, how are we going to work together? Right? I'm here to help. I'm not here to steal. Okay. I have all these options. Let's work together as a community and please take the business card of this local NephCure rep, just like a sales rep.
Yeah.
Put it into the patient chart that has glomerular disease, and let's let them know that we're here to help. And we'll meet on a routine basis. And we think that's a good start this year.
Wonderful. And then let's say a patient wants to, through social media, hears about NephCure, they want to participate in a clinical trial. How would NephCure facilitate it in 2021? Great.
So glad you asked that, because we got a couple ways. So if you're a patient listening to this, please go to www.kidneyhealthgateway.com. And if you can't remember that, just go to our website, nephcure.org, and you'll see a link. And it's very user-friendly. Click a button. I'm a patient, I'm a doctor, and it will step-by-step guide you through the process. There's also a whole bunch of Q&A. And people have to know that this is a golden opportunity. This is a rare disease with treatments that are already in late or mid-phase clinical trials that have been proven already through phase 1 safety and now ready to to really make a difference. And so you do not have to be forced to go onto high dose steroids again.
I want to deviate just slightly to the African American population and community, and in recognition of the fact that African Americans have a higher incidence of kidney disease than white Caucasians. How do we engage African Americans in kidney research?
This is a huge focus of ours, and I'm remiss in not mentioning it sooner, so I'm glad you brought it up. One of our main goals this year as an organization, and in perpetuity, I shouldn't say just this year, is addressing health inequities, as you mentioned. African Americans, or Black Americans, that constitute 13% of the US population, but they make up over a third of dialysis, transplants, and chronic kidney disease in the United States. So it's just a magnifying glass for the disparities that exist. It's can't be allowed to stand anymore. And so we are launching actually an initiative in partnership with an organization called HEAL. And the goal is to pilot, at NephCure, we just want to do. We want to not talk about a white paper or some paper that's, going to be out years from now. We want to do something. And so we're actually piloting how to find the patients. So to answer your question directly, as we all know, there's just an innate and sadly earned mistrust of clinical trials in the United States with the African and Black community, just Tuskegee and others. And it really is a matter of brokering that trust and fostering that. And what I think the community doesn't want to see is fly in, thank you very much for your participation, and fly out. It really has to be a durable commitment. And so I would ask any company to please, the patient edge materials have to be more culturally relevant to the Black population than just in general. They also have to see doctors that frankly look like them. That is what they've told us, more participation of Black American nephrologists. And so we've made a commitment to address this. And so what we want to see, what FINISH looks like to us is, if there's a trial, that the trial represents, just like the vaccines, the diversity of America reflected in the trial recruitment of your trial. We also want to see in our regional communities an equal representation, how that reflecting America. And most importantly, as we talked about earlier, getting to the care earlier in the paradigm. And that's not, it's not going to be easy. We're reaching out to churches, we're doing all kinds of things at a grassroots level, and I think that's where it has to happen, really at a grassroots level.
Fabulous. Well, kudos to you. So you may not, I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm interested if you've seen any success and how you, and what was successful in helping to accelerate recruitment, not just African Americans, but kidney patients into trials. What advice would you give Goldfinch and other biotech companies about the best way to recruit for their trials?
So I've been to your offices, and I can see the culture at Goldfinch. It's a very relaxed, progressive, friendly environment, and I think so. You guys have the right orientation just from culturally that what you put in place, Tony, and that really stems down to the patient. It's all about intimacy of the patient and the patient understanding the trial. And the advice I would give is twofold. One, at a doctor recruitment level, it's great to have the glomerular disease experts, but also the next tier. Who are the big practices that see the patients? But from a patient perspective, the number one reason why patients participate in kidney trials is they want to give back. It's not even for themselves, believe it or not. It's they want to give back, and that's consistent in every survey we've ever done. So recognizing that these are good folks that really well intended, and that they get the benefit, of course, themselves. But so what I'm trying to say is it's an intimacy. If the contract research organization or whoever, because of regulatory environment, touches the patient, that they provided with patient ed materials, talk to the patient, understand this is how this trial is going to work. This is how we can help you. Here's a 24-hour hotline, and keep them active in the communication throughout the process. And I think that goes a long, long way.
Yeah, I think you're right. And just expanding on this a little more, one last topic I wanted to cover before we close is the importance of the patient perspective. Tell me about what NephCure has undertaken to incorporate the patient perspective in the clinical research they support.
Right. So it's a multi-level, right? Never an easy answer. And so how does the patient go in here? So number one, we've had panels that was sponsored by the FDA that we've worked together to record the voice of patient. So the FDA hears it, and when you send a protocol to the FDA, now the FDA says, okay, you know what? PRO, the patient-reported outcome, that makes sense. In fact, you can almost get an approval using a PRO, and that we've heard the patient say, yeah, this is really important, and we need to do these things and be inclusive. So that's number one. I would say at a regulatory level is something that we've done. I think at the next level is, again, providing the infrastructure such as kidneyhealthgateway.com and others that patients, we are kind of the go-to organization in clinical trials for nephrotic syndrome, and that we're on the social media and we're doing everything we can to dispel the myths about clinical trials and show that this is a golden opportunity for you for care for all the reasons that we mentioned. And I think going forward with our regional communities, what we've done is made this part of our mission. And when we talk to new patients, in the same breath, when we say, welcome to NephCure, we say, don't look at the internet. Whatever if it's from 2017 back, don't even read it. It's outdated because the world, as all we've talked about, has changed dramatically, right? And now we go a step further. We say, okay, what about the future? And we are here to help you. And the reason we say things are different is now we can do genetic testing. That wasn't available before so readily. Now we've got clinical trials for you to participate in. You don't necessarily have to go on these high-dose steroids and immunosuppressives. We've got all kinds of understanding about other medications that we can put together. And we also know who are the doctors you need to see, by the way, equally important. And so that's what our future looks like. I think brokering the relationship with the patient so that the patient's not in the burden of going to the doctor. Can you imagine putting yourself in your doctor? I didn't go to medical school. You're a doctor, Tony, right? So, at the end of the day, standing up and looking at this patient, this medical school doctor and all the great degrees they have and saying, I want to talk to another doctor, Dr. So-and-so. And that's a clinical trial. That's not an easy conversation, right?
Yeah.
Breaking up with your doctor. And we're not breaking up. We just want you to be a quarterback. And we want this other person to be a receiver and help out.
Yeah.
And brokering that. So that's our role. And, I think things are really optimistic right now. It's an incredible time.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a phenomenal time to be moving the needle to help patients with kidney disease, for sure. Just want to thank you again for speaking with us today, Josh. The insights you provided, so valuable as we and many others work to advance innovation in the kidney space. I think NephCure is doing a phenomenal job. They've been tremendously successful. And, hearing you talk, the future looks incredibly optimistic. We at Goldfinch are excited to continue the partnership, and I'm sure other industry partners are as well. And we're looking to work with you on how to be more helpful for people living with kidney disease. So thank you once again, and really appreciate your time.
Tony, thank you for everything. If you want these comments, take them out. But I would like to say something about Goldfinch. So Tony, I would like to thank you and your team. For people who don't know the pharmaceutical industry, the easy path is to take diseases that are tried and path tread with the big markets. It takes courage, it takes bravery, and it takes a lot of stick-to-itiveness to convince investors and people to go into rare disease, especially rare kidney disease. And so I thank you and your team at Goldfinch for doing what you're doing. You're helping to save lives and the future of patients of ours. And thank you for all you're doing. And it's an honor to partner with you.